Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Adumullah ujurana wa ujurakum bimusabina bil Hussein alayhi salam. In this series, we are exploring the life and the legacy of one of the most prominent figures in the movement of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. That is to say, the Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, the one who became known as the voice of Karbala, the voice of the message of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. And because of her, the entire world was able to learn about what had happened in Karbala. We are joining you from the holy site of Masjid al-Hanana in the holy city of Najaf al-Ashraf. And this very place where we are right now is one of the places where Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, herself stopped with the rest of the women and the children who were prisoners after the tragedy in Karbala, as well as Al-Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. And this is one of the places where the sacred head of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam was placed, a place that the Imams themselves, peace be upon them, demonstrated respect to. So we can send our special salams to Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, from this holy mosque. Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, had now embarked on the journey towards Kufa and ultimately to Karbala with her brother, Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Historians have recorded very little of what she did on that journey. Instead, the eyes of history would be turned towards her after the martyrdom of the Imam. Indeed, when we looked at the Maqsa literature, we see that history begins to record what she said, what she did immediately after the martyrdom of the Imam alayhi salam on the day of Ashura. However, there are a few things that are mentioned with respect to Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, on the long, difficult journey to Karbala, and one can surmise how she might have felt. Given that she was so concerned for her brother, one can surmise how she felt when many of those who had set off with the Imam alayhi salam from Mecca and Medina did not journey with him all the way to Karbala, because there were those who had joined him thinking he is going to claim glory, he is going to claim power, he is going to claim fame. And then they saw that no, the Imam's mission is something else. And these people, who were not true companions and true supporters, left him. This must have been very disheartening to her. However, it must have also brought hope and reassurance to her heart when some sincere, true people, sincere people whom the Imam alayhi salam would refer to as the best of companions, joined him along the way, sometimes unlikely people in unlikely places, until finally they arrived in Karbala. By this time, they had been accosted by the enemy army. The enemy soldiers around them were growing in number. It was as if it was an ocean of enemy soldiers surrounding them. As far as the eye could see, there were men whose only aim was to kill them, to obliterate them, to put out their message, and to end the stand of the Imam alayhi salam. Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, on the night of Ashura, was speaking with her brother, Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, inside one of the tents. She was concerned for her brother. Note that she was not concerned for herself. And indeed, this is one of the very beautiful qualities of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, this perpetual selflessness, always being concerned for the other and not looking after one's own well-being when there is someone else to look after. And she says to her brother, I am very worried about you. Are you sure these companions are going to stand with you tomorrow? And indeed, there was some precedent for that question. After all, at the Battle of Uhud, did all of the companions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ stand with him? So there was a precedent for Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, to worry. But the Imam alayhi salam said, no, do not worry. These companions, I have tested them. They are good companions. They will stand with us to the end. It is related that some of the companions heard this question of Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, and they grew very distressed They did not want her to think that they would ever betray the Imam. And so, as is related, they decided to give a show of their strength and a show of their loyalty. And they got out their swords and they got out their spears and they began to march around the camp, declaring their loyalty to the Imam. And after they had declared their loyalty to the Imam, they declared their loyalty to the women from the family of the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said, "These are our swords, and we will only strike with them those people who would harm you. And these are our spears, and we will only use them on those people who would stand against you." And we see from this, incidentally, that not only were the companions concerned about the Imam alayhi salam, but they were also concerned about the women and the children also, that they saw it as their duty to try to protect everyone, and indeed they would give their lives in this cause. It is also related that on the night of Ashura, Al-Imam Ali Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, the Imam relates, "I saw my father on the night of Ashura mending his sword." Now at this time, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was ill, and most likely Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, was next to the Imam and tending him in his illness. The Imam says alayhi salam, "I saw my father mending his sword, and he was reciting these verses. Ya dahru uffin laka min khalili, kam laka bil ishraqi wal asili." Shame on you, time. Shame on you as a friend. From the time of day's dawning till the time it does end. How many a friend will be a corpse, cold still dead. Time won't be pleased with a stand-in instead. The matter will rest with the great, mighty one. And not a living being will remain. We must all go, one by one. The Imam relates, alayhi salam, "When I heard my father saying these verses of poetry, I understood that fate was near. And I began to shed tears, but silently, just silently, these tears began to flow down my cheeks." But he continues, alayhi salam, "As for my Aunt Zaynab, peace be upon her, she could not stand to hear Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam saying this. She could not stand to hear her Imam announcing his own death. And of course, again, this is someone who is the most beloved person in creation to her, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, someone who she has been inseparable, someone who she has literally spent her entire life with. This is someone who is also the Imam, the Hujjat Allah upon earth, someone who has authority over all creation. And this is also someone who, according to our narrations, is described as the most beloved of Allah's creations in the heaven and the earth. And indeed, as is said in the narrations, there is a fire in the hearts of the believers, the mu'mineen, out of love and grief for Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So when Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, when she hears this, she too begins to cry like Al-Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, and she says, "Woe be upon me. I wish that I had died before you, O Abu Abdullah. It's as if my mother Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha has died again today." And of course, this was not a calamity that had just struck Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her. This is a calamity that they had all been through together. Their mother Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha had died. She says, "It's as if our father Ali has died again. It's as if our brother Hassan has been killed again. And now we're going to lose you, Abu Abdullah." Upon hearing this, the other women in the camp began to cry and shed tears again. And the Imam advised them that although they would endure tremendous grief, to try to be strong in front of the enemy, to carry themselves with dignity. And there is a lesson in this. And the lesson is incidentally not that they should not show grief. After all, there is no end to the thawab and the divine reward in sincerely expressing and feeling grief for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, right? We do so many things out of remembrance for Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam that we would not do even for our own children or our own family members. There is indeed a special fire in the hearts for the mu'mineen with respect to Al-Imam al-Hussein. So it's not that they should not have sadness, but rather it is that when they have to stand firm in front of the enemy, do not show weakness, and instead stand firm in the way of Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And then very importantly, the Imam gives a will to Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her. And there are two very important parts to this will. One part we are oftentimes reminded of, and that was he reminded her of her responsibility to take care of the widows and the orphans after the tragedy in Karbala. After the Imam's martyrdom, there would be no one else to look after them. And in that society, the biggest calamity for a woman was to be alone, not to have any men to protect her. And it was, of course, a very dangerous situation. They're not in safety, they're not in security, they're in the middle of the desert, there are enemies who are harming them, who are beating them, who have ill will towards them. So it was a very precarious situation. And the responsibility did fall to Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, to do her best to make sure that no one came to harm. There was another part of that will, however, that was also very important, theologically. And that is the Imam alayhi salam also told Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, to be sure to remind our followers, to remind our Shia, that the Imam after me is Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. That is to say, to tell our followers about the nos of the imamate, the designation of the imamate. Now, of course, frequently throughout their lives, the Imams, peace be upon them, would tell people who is to be the next Imam after me. However, in the moments before they left this world, that was the most crucial time to remind people which Imam they should be following. And interestingly, this is not the only case in which the nos, or the designation of the imamate, was given at a certain time through a woman, in this case Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her. And interestingly, this account is referred to by Lady Hakima, the aunt of Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, because someone once came to her to ask about the imamate and the proof of the imamate and who should be the next imam, which was sometimes a subject of some debate. And she says, yes, this is the correct imam, you know, imam, the 10th imam, the 11th imam, and so forth. And then she says, you should follow what this particular companion has reported in his hadith and given to his mother, recorded for his mother. Now this person in this dialogue, unfortunately, he had a bit of a, one could say a old-fashioned mentality. He said, no, how is it that I could follow someone who instructs a woman, you know, who instructs a woman openly? He saw this as something dishonorable. So Lady Hakima, peace be upon her, of course we see the irony in this situation, she says to him, and this is in our books of narrations, she says, if you follow someone who instructs a woman, you are following none other than Al-Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, peace be upon him, because he was the one who instructed Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, out in the open with respect to the nos of the imamate and the designation of the imamate. And so this was another very heavy responsibility that Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, bore. Not only the responsibility to look after the people who survived the tragedy in Karbala, but also to look after the future of the ummah, because us today, we are desperately in need of the guidance of the imams. If we did not have Imam Ali Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, if we did not have the du'as of Imam Ali Zayn al-Abidin and the ahadith, where would we be? And this is something we also have to be very grateful to Sayyida Zaynab, peace be upon her, for. Inshallah, Allah Ta'ala fills us with loyalty towards the Imams and awareness of their teachings. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi tayyibin. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.